Hi everyone, thank you for joining our webinar and panel discussion today about leadership in uncertain times. My name is Jen Newcomb. I'm the Charity Marketing Associate here at CanadaHelps, and I'm happy to welcome you to today's panel discussion, which will be led and moderated by our Chief Operating Officer, Jane Ricciardelli. In this discussion, we'll be going over how to lead successfully through uncertainty, HR best practices and employment law considerations, updates on government assistance programs, tactics to help you determine what's next if you're trying to fill key roles, and ideas to help you assist yourself and your teams through anxiety. We have a question and answer period planned after the panel discussion to address any questions you may have. But before I hand it over to Jane to get us started, let's just go over some quick housekeeping slides. All right, so for those of you who are new to CanadaHelps, welcome. We build online fundraising tools to empower and help charities become more self-sustainable. For charities, we offer open access to our full suite of affordable online giving tools with full donor information. We also provide educational resources so charities can better understand their donors and steward them along their journey. For donors, we have offered a convenient, safe, and trusted destination for donating to and fundraising for all registered Canadian charities for more than 19 years. More than 2 million Canadians have donated over $1 billion through CanadaHelps, and to date, over 20,000 charities across Canada rely on CanadaHelps' fundraising tools to build capacity. So that's just a little bit about us. In terms of following along with the webinar, if you're having trouble hearing me, please try turning up your computer's volume. If that doesn't work, click Sound Check under your GoToWebinar panel, select the Speaker tab, and then turn the volume on the Speaker tab to the far right for maximum volume. And for the best webinar experience, we recommend closing all of your applications. We'll be emailing you the links within 24 hours after the webinar ends. And please note, you can hear us, hopefully, but we can't hear you. If you have any questions at all, just type them into the questions log of your GoToWebinar panel at any time, and we'll be able to assist you there. Once again, we'll go through all of your questions about the presentation during the Q&A portion at the end. So let's get started. Over to you, Jane.
Thanks, Jen, and thanks to everyone for joining us today. Like you, we at CanadaHelps are experiencing a high degree of uncertainty as we navigate through all the changes the coronavirus pandemic has brought to our personal and professional lives. So today, we've brought together a panel of experts to talk about effective leadership in uncertain times. We will be answering some of the most common questions that were submitted in advance, as well as allowing some time at the end for more questions. To start off, I'm going to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves and provide a synopsis of their perspectives on leadership during times of uncertainty in order to set the stage for our discussion. We'll start with Marianne.
Thank you, Jane. Those who know me will know that 3 or 4 minutes to say something is not enough time. But I do want to start by thanking CanadaHelps. The whole team there have been absolutely fantastic, and each of the panelists for stepping up and saying yes and volunteering their time. I think leadership is not a position. Leadership is not about having studied it. You can have an MA or a PhD, and what that means is that you've studied leadership, not necessarily that you're a leader. So when I think about leadership, I think about it coming from a place of really deep authenticity. It's about knowing who you are. It's about understanding your impact in the world. And so I guess what I believe beyond all else is that there's more than one right answer. So anything any of us might say today, except maybe specifics about programs that you are either eligible for or not, I think much of what we will say today is a yes and conversation. So I start by thinking about the fact that leadership for me hasn't changed. I think that we lead today through uncertainty as we led previously. And so those that I'm working with at the moment, I am client-free. So in terms of, what the impact of this in the last 2 weeks, it's been staggering. I've just watched my clients kind of say, no, first thing to go is the independent consultant. So first, it's about leading at home. It's about leading myself. It's about leading with both vulnerability around the uncertainty in my own life and confidence in the future and optimism around the future. It's about checking in with the folks I'm working with, and that includes my family. My daughters have both said to me, we don't need you to ask us if we're doing our online courses. You're not in my dorm room. You're not at my house in Kingston, so don't ask us now. Fair enough. It's about transparency and sharing as much information as I can and directing people to resources as I'm able. It's about continuing to be kind and compassionate both to myself. We've discovered siesta size at my house. That means that you get your blankie and your pillow and you take a nap when you need one. And it's about being generous. So recognizing that I think we keep hearing this too shall pass. We have no idea when. We don't know how different the world will be. But each of us have an opportunity to lead. And so I hope that you will do that, because people in this sector, I think that what we do it because we feel a deep sense of responsibility for the world, and we feel it more now than ever.
Thank you, Marianne. Sarah, would you please go next?
Sure, I'd love to follow that. I have to admit, giggling to myself a bit, Marianne, as you said, the only place where things might be sort of certain is what programs you might be eligible for, and unfortunately, there's not a lot of certainty to be found anywhere, but there is some. In terms of my 4 minutes, similarly challenged to Marianne in putting anything to 4 minutes. I'm an employment lawyer, and so what we do is we help all workers, businesses, unions solve legal problems at work. I have a team of 4 lawyers, and I've been doing it for 16 years, and I am learning, I think, about 10 new skills a day right now. So my biggest personal professional takeaway has been the death of perfectionism, which was actually much needed. So I look forward to what I can achieve. I was asked to give one slide which would give some helpful information, and like a typical lawyer, I put it in a chart so I could maximize as much possible content on there. And I'm not going to review that in my 4 minutes, but I am going to give you some key messages from a big picture. So what we're doing right now, and I am still working with clients, our whole team is working, is looking at labor cost reductions. And that's in every sector, but particularly in the not-for-profit and charitable sector. And so what I would like to encourage everyone to do, the title of my slide is Layoffs, Work Sharing, and Subsidies, oh my. And it's a list of labor cost reduction strategies. So I would say this is my most frequently asked questions, is like, what on earth are all these things and how can I possibly use them? And so my first message is look at all of them. There are actually lots. Like, we're in a time where, unfortunately, we have to look at layoffs or cost reduction for the first time for many organizations, but there are actually lots of programs and tools available. And that can be a bit overwhelming. And so what I'm seeing is quite a bit of knee-jerk where people are just, seeing one life raft and grabbing onto it rather than looking at the whole picture. So my first message is step back, look at all the options. There's actually quite a few of them, and avoid knee-jerks. One theme I think you'll hear is constant, and Marianne mentioned this, I'll build off of it, is continuing on the same way that we had before in some respects. And one of those is being true to your organizational values, thinking about your stakeholders. In the not-for-profit sector, you've got all the same stakeholders that every for-profit business does, plus a whole bunch of other stakeholders like donors and the community. So think about when you're deciding with labor cost reductions, it should be like anything else where you're thinking about what is our organization all about, and what do we stand for, and how can we make decisions that are true to that and are going to honor our stakeholders. Think through all of the strategies. So I recommend making a list, and this is what I do with my clients as we go through, okay, what are all of the options here, and list them all out and talk about the risks and the benefits of each. I've included a few key risks here for some of the different programs, but of course there's many more, and the stakes are super high in this. Like, the stakes are high. Your organization's continuity could turn on this, these labor cost reductions, and also your consistency with your values and protection of your team. So these things, it's definitely a smart idea to spend the time to go through them. And then get informed or get advice. So this chart is laughable. I mean, I'm not going to pretend that it's thorough in any way. And there are lots of information coming out daily about some of these programs, like the wage subsidy, for instance. We saw more yesterday, a lot more detail on that. And it can be really hard to keep up. And so what I recommend is go to reliable sources. Go to the government's website. The news media is great to get ideas, but then drill down and actually find the content. Don't go to your Facebook chat group to look for information on who's eligible for EI. Go to the government website. Go to reliable law firm websites. A lot of us are posting things. Our firm is posting every day information, including links of where to go for more. And it is different province by province. So that's another key thing. So if you're in Ontario and you're looking for BC information, it might be totally inapplicable. So there are some variations. Check your provincial legal developments. And 2 more points. So getting legal advice seems crazy right now. Paying a lawyer, I completely agree, is like, independent consultants, we're probably high up on the list of cost cuts, and we don't get a lot of empathy when our work runs out. But I would, at revealing my bias, say it's time well spent. Our firm is offering flat rate fees and also discounts for those in the charitable sector. So don't give up without calling. Call first and see what it's actually going to cost, and it might be that it's budget you should have and make available. And my last is communicate and consult with your employees. And I'm not going to hit this too hard because other people here are way more qualified to talk to me about this. But I have seen some amazing stories in the last couple of weeks of companies who talked to their workers about who wasn't comfortable being at work anymore. And that turned out to be the exact number of people they needed to lay off. And they were able to keep a skeleton staff there that wanted to keep working. So don't give up, be creative, consult your team. And with that, I'll pass it along.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. Now it's Amanda's turn.
Thank you, Jane. So my name's Amanda Rocheleau. I'm a registered social worker in Ontario. I'm located in Ottawa, where I have a private practice that is specifically designed to help other helping professionals, so specifically those in social services or healthcare services, frontline workers. A long time ago, I noticed that there was a need for help for the helpers. This is probably a time for that more than ever before. So I do individual therapy or consultations. I do consultations within agencies and organizations to help them develop strategies for psychological health and safety. And then I also offer a ton of different types of trainings, which I'm now delivering online or trying to, figuring out how to. And those are listed on my website, and there'll be a slide at the end of this workshop that will deliver all of our contact information, so you'll be able to check it out there. So I think that my key message in this 4-minute intro, which is also very challenging to do, is that really during a time where we are all strategizing, talking about plans, trying to find ways to have our optimal physical health and safety. I think this is also the time to be looking at our psychological health and safety plans. This is going to be a long-term game where this isn't just I think we're all coming to terms with that this isn't a short-term thing. So I think the sustainability of our frontline workers, of our organizations is most important. And so that means not just looking at what strategies we have to keep people physically healthy and safe, but also mentally healthy and safe. So I have been spending the last 3 weeks talking to frontline workers who are still out there, or their jobs have changed, or they're working from home, trying to meet client needs that way. And these quick 6 bullet points are directly from them about what they have been going through. So First point is collective self-care is really important. I think one of the, it's really important that we take a collective responsibility for self-care or for the well-being, the care of all of our staff. I think I honestly can't tell you enough how damaging it is when agencies or leadership put the onus on the individual to practice self-care. The psychological risk is happening in the workplace, whether they are actually physically in the workplace or not now, and that is where we all need to be integrating mental health strategies and practices within the job, not something that we do afterwards. So everything from taking breaks, talking to each other, having a laugh, decompressing, debriefing, these are practices that should be done within the job. Another point is watching for signs of burnout. So burnout is the emotional and physical collapse, the exhaustion as a result of prolonged stress and frustration. So we are in that state, right? We're talking about prolonged stress. So the risk of burnout is going to increase the longer we're in this. The signs of burnout are not always very clear, right? People aren't walking around going, I'm burnt out. Some of us are. I've heard that plenty of times, but it's important for leadership to know that the signs of burnout are generally quite subtle. So things like forgetfulness, confusion, having a hard time making decisions, illness, fatigue, these can be signs of burnout. There is a stress and burnout questionnaire on my website, which is under the free resources page. There's a ton of assessments that you can be looking at those assessments as guides, right? These tools to use to be able to evaluate the mental health of your team or even yourself. So looking for those signs of burnout is really important as we go along into a prolonged situation. Help your team manage guilt. Helpers generally experience self-inflicted guilt because, as was mentioned earlier, we're in it because our values and our hearts say, I care and I want to do good. I want to relieve suffering of others. So it's really important for leadership to reinforce messages that, hey, we know these are difficult times. We don't expect you to be a superhero. We see your limitations. We see you as a human being. I think that leadership can really help reinforce these ideas that it's important that you are enough. You are doing enough. You need to take a step back and recover at times. So just know that they're going to be feeling guilty probably whether you try to, whatever you're doing. I'm sure you're not trying to deliberately make them feel guilty for not being there as superheroes, but that's there in and of itself. Create some guidelines to help manage workload. This is a real struggle that a lot of my clients are facing right now. Their jobs have changed, their hours have changed, their roles have changed, they're working from home. I hear a lot of stories about people struggling with setting the boundary now, right? There isn't this beginning and end of the workday. Their emails are 24/7, client needs are changing. And people are often, those who are working at home or even if they're going in, everybody is who has kids has now got that on their plate and they're trying to juggle that as well. So I think it's really important that there be some conversations about when work begins and ends, some rules around checking emails, when do you check in, when don't you, when do you take your breaks, that kind of stuff. I think the agencies that are putting those types of guidelines into practice are really starting to, the staff are feeling that protective factor, that they know that there's some rules around that. And they might need some help in that area. Be clear about your expectations. I think that is something I've been hearing a lot about. There are people who, well, if you're not clear, there are people who are going to make assumptions about what is expected of them. So some clarity around that, what's realistic at this time, what you can do, what your staff can do, and what the agency in a whole can do. And then finally, talk to each other. I think it's really important that we don't just make these general assumptions or ideas about what everybody's going through and respond. I think people have unique situations, and we need to be going right to the source, talking to teams, talking to individuals, saying, how are you? What's going on? What does your experience look like? What can you do? What can I do to help? What can someone else do to help you? And these are important questions to ask right now, and probably more so than ever before. So I think I kept it brief. So thanks for listening.
Thanks, Amanda. Yeah, I know certainly for me, being a couple of weeks into this, and now sort of the physical, like the setup and how this all works and getting on Zoom and getting used to these kinds of interactions with people, that's kind of settled. It's true. It's very much the mental and the self-care. My shoulders feel like they're up around my ears all the time, so I'm constantly having to remind myself to do this because this isn't over. We've got a ways to go, and I think that has a big impact, the uncertainty that we all feel around that. Okay, so Matt will be up next, please.
Thanks, everyone. My name is Matt Corker, and I am the CEO and primary consultant at the Corker Collective. We are an HR-based firm that does recruiting, manager training that's online and offline, and we do a number of custom programs around people strategies. Over the last couple weeks, we've been working a lot with our clients on pivoting from offline operations into online operations, whether it's delivering programs, how to host meetings, but also how to terminate employees that, at the end of Q1 for a lot of people, they were planning on trimming some of their staff anyway to right-size their company. And now, because of COVID-19, that looks a little differently because we have to do it digitally and there's extenuating circumstances as well. One of the things that I keep coming back to through the last couple of weeks with my clients is that we've actually always had uncertainty. We've never been able to predict the future. We've never been able to guarantee what happens tomorrow, yet we're really good at planning. We really look back and say, well, I made a to-do list for tomorrow, so now I know what my tomorrow looks like. And the reality is that that's never been true. And so the veil has finally been lifted, and we really get to see the level of uncertainty that we always face. And now more than ever, there's changing. We're now in a context where the dynamics are shifting, and every day the shift is very noticeable. So whereas before we kind of just didn't know if that person would call me at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock, now we don't know what the legislation will be at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock. So I want to make sure that even though the level of uncertainty that we've always led with, it's now just increased. And the thing that gets me the most excited and hopeful during this time is that vision-based leaders, people who are able to predict or envision a future of it all working out, those are the leaders of the organizations that are really thriving right now. They're the ones who are looking at this opportunity as a way to pivot and change their operations without panicking. And so the 4 things that I wanted to share with you today before going into the question and answer was really, how do you pivot instead of quitting? We're seeing a number of different events, a number of different opportunities that are being canceled or postponed. And my offering is people are still online. People are still focused. You have people's attention towards your organization. And so now as a leader, how do you pivot that to be either online or more exclusive, or give people an opportunity to connect more broadly because more people can now come together than ever before. And so look for opportunities to pivot rather than just quit and cancel. In terms of managing a team, for those of you who have never managed a remote team before, that can be a really daunting experience because it's not a one-for-one relationship. I don't have to go into an office. I don't say hello to my team. I don't sit at my desk and my computer without any distractions. And so what I would offer here is think about including a higher frequency of touch bases, but spend less time. So a touch base could be a text, it could be a voice memo, it could be a quick Zoom call or something with video, but it's more about checking in on the person and the projects that are on the go. But it's more frequent rather than like we have to sit down and have an hour-long meeting. It may actually just be a 15-second like, hey, I got a question, let's go on video. We spend about 1 minute looking at each other in the eyeballs to know that we're in this together, and then being able to go back to our own work. Goal setting is a really big conversation as well with my clients. And what we're noticing is that vision-based leaders are still planning, they're still setting goals, they're still setting targets, but the time horizon has shortened. So instead of planning out your year, what if you just planned out your week? Or what if you planned out the next 2 weeks? And given the information that you have now, what are your focal points? What are your key priorities for that time frame instead? It'll keep your team motivated and still focused on what's the most important. And my favorite one is that we now get to see into people's homes. We get to see their kids, their pets, their weird bookshelf that has books falling off of it. And so now is a time more than ever to embrace this personal aspect of it, where we really get to, what Marianne said about this vulnerability, like we're inviting people into homes, and our colleagues have never been there before for many of us. So embrace this personal, this humanity side of it, and rather than demanding perfection. People are likely not going to, get dressed in a full suit to come on a video call from a work from home. And maybe that's the time to really look at, oh, how do we do this all the time? And that's it for me.
I love it. I love that getting to see people's animals and pets. We had a company-wide meeting, Zoom chat, where we had everybody's faces, all across the screen. And at the very end, everybody brought their pets or their kids in to kind of wave. And it was really nice. It was a really nice moment that I don't think we could have experienced any other way, except for in this sort of virtual town hall that we'd set up for the company. Thank you for that. And last but not least, we have David.
Great, thanks, Jane, and greetings to everyone today. I know if you're anything like me, you've been listening to lots of podcasts or reading or certainly seeing the headlines, but none of us have been here before, and that seems to be a message that keeps coming out. But just a quick overview of my background. I've been in the talent business for over 20 years now. Work exclusively with charities and helping them find executive leadership and fundraisers. And so our business is tied very much to the charitable sector, and we're keenly aware that there's a lot of unrest and challenge and upheaval going on right now. So as I've been listening to people speak or read their articles, certainly a recognition that these are definitely uncertain times. We're all in this together, and the hope is that we will see leadership rise from any place in the organization, because I don't think, back to Marianne's earlier comments, leadership happens at every level of the organization, not just in the C-suite, and certainly not just on the board of directors. So but I am also on 3 boards, and I serve on the corporation of another organization. So I have a viewpoint from that perspective as well. And I know this is perhaps unsettling for some boards of directors as well. Many have not been in this situation, especially if they're a volunteer board member. And leaders themselves, I'm just going to put a plug out there. We need a lot of grace for our key leaders right at the moment. They are trying to exercise and make decisions in ways that they've never had to. And so I would just encourage you, all of us really, to give them some slack as we attempt to work through this together. Some of the points that I wanted to touch on today, and again, this is a lot of this is new, just from recent readings and podcasts as well, because we're seeing a lot of ideas and innovation coming out now, or at least perspective to help us as we try to navigate the next days and weeks, and hopefully not too many more months. But we still need a talent strategy, and I think the reality is that the charitable sector is going through a complete upheaval. But we were, to echo Matt's statements earlier, these have been uncertain times for charities anyways. Even in, if I could go back 2 or 3 weeks, I could have easily said that there's still uncertainty in the charitable sector, certainly around leadership and the transition of leadership. We were already facing probably one of the largest leadership transitions that the charitable sector has faced. Certain demographics, the demographic I'm in, Gen X, isn't there in the sufficient numbers to kind of meet the need of the future levels of leadership that we'll need. And so what is my hope and what I'm really encouraged about is that we have emerging leaders coming out of the millennial, certainly at the top end of the millennial group as well. And so that's where a lot of our future leadership is coming forward. So that was 3 weeks ago. Nothing has really changed on that front, except now we're in the middle of a global pandemic, and who could have even begun to think that this would be the case that we'd be in. So, so some of the the serious issues we're facing from a talent perspective are there. Now they're just there times 10 or times 1,000, depending on your organization. So having a talent strategy is still very vital, and especially now that we've, in a sense, had to throw out the playbook, as people are saying, and re-engage with our strategy and re-engage with not just strategy, but sustainability and continuity in some cases. And then the other, the flip side of that is that we still do have people that are working within our organizations. I know we've heard of layoffs, and unfortunately, I'm sure we're going to hear of some more. And we're really hopeful that some of these stabilizing financial stimulus will come from the government, which would be amazing. But I think somebody just posted a little while ago that even that's not going to be sufficient for some organizations. So getting creative with retention. We've heard ideas. I'm sure you've heard ideas already, but are there people on staff who could actually afford, because their circumstances are different, that they could afford to step back? Are there ways to share hours? Are there ways to reduce the cost of labor without everybody being laid off? Is there sort of a shared collaborative way that we could do that? So just thinking through the creative and ways that we can retain the people that we have. It is costly to replace the people that we let go. And if we do let them go, we may never get them back. And that's the reality as well. This is just assumptive on my part, but reality is I'm sure we're going to lose some of our charitable leaders and contributors back to the private sector or back into corporate, which is understandable. They're going to have to pursue opportunities that would help them support their families. So looking at creative ways to do retention so that we're not, at the end of this, completely stripped of the people that we need within our organizations. And then the question came up, if you can afford to hire, do it. That's the entry statement to this. I guess it comes back to the talent strategy, though. And as I was doing some reading, one of the authors that I was reading said, you hire based on your talent strategy. You don't just hire for the sake of hiring. That does the organization no good. So even though we're kind of ripping up last week's strategy and we're entering into a new one, it still needs to fit within what the scope of the organization needs, and does that position need to be filled at this time? Now, on the flip side, there are a few organizations that are quite sustainable right now. They're not ripping up their playbook. They do have a solid strategy moving forward, and they have the funding. I would encourage them to keep hiring. I hope they do, and I think that would help, at least from the perspective of the sector, keep more people employed than not. But frankly, that's probably a minority of organizations right now in the charitable sector, and so when it comes to hiring right now, does it fit your strategy? Is it the right time, and is it the right person? And so those are considerations. The flip side of that is maybe you don't need to hire full-time right now, but you do need the help of either an outside consultant or people on contract who could come in for the next 3 or 4 months and help you. Those are considerations. I hope those considerations are last as it relates to if you've done layoffs in your organization, that there isn't conflicting elements that go between who you laid off and who you're bringing in on a contract basis. So those are just things to be aware of as well. But this is, again, I'll echo Matt's comments. This is an opportunity for leadership to step up, to really be innovative, and to really be able to look at their organization strategically, see how they fit within the sector. Are there others they could be collaborating with? are there people that they could second to other organizations? Perhaps if you're at a federal level, you can second some of your people to the provincial levels. I'm not sure. These are just thoughts, but the reality is we've never been in this place before. Leadership is hopefully going to step up. Board members, C-suite, everybody else who's a leader. And the opportunity, I think, that we have in front of us is to together collaborate and get through this.
Thank you. So thanks to all of you for sharing your insights and your thoughts. It gives everybody a good idea of your areas of expertise. So now we're going to move to the Q&A section of the webinar. We received a number of questions from the people who registered for the webinar, and we picked some of the most common ones for experts to answer. The first question is for Sarah, and is based on the number of inquiries on this one. It's on the mind of many charities today. So for a charity, what is the best program that the government is offering to assist with staff salaries?
Well, that's a complicated question. I hate to be the typical lawyer, but like the answer to that absolutely is it depends. And I think, I had a little preview of this question when I was putting together my intro slide. So I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but the answer is there is no single best program that is going to work best for every charity. There absolutely is not. And it's going to completely depend on your specific circumstances. And so the best strategy is a question I can answer. And again, that's to do as full of a review as possible. There are so many programs available. Review them, keeping in mind your stakeholders, your value, your goals, your strategies, and weighing the pros and cons, and just make sure you're getting good information. I think this, just to focus on a couple maybe, the work sharing program is really interesting. That's something that has actually been in place for a very long time. And I have to say, in my 16 years of employment law practice, I had never heard of it until a few weeks ago, and I think many employment lawyers and business leaders and HR professionals were in the same boat. It's like this dark horse that came out of nowhere. It was previously only available to particular industrial sectors, so it had broad availability. Then it was retracted just to forestry, aluminum, and steel, which is what it was most recently, and now it's been reopened. I have to say the government has done an excellent job in streamlining the application process for work sharing. So my website has a blog that is called Can Work Sharing Save Your Business? So I would suggest you look at that. All the comments in there are completely applicable to the charitable sector, and as with any, and take a look at the specific requirements of the program. It used to be, when this very first was announced, there was a 30-day approval time window advertised, and the application process was unbelievably onerous, and they have just absolutely cut that to the quick. The application form is not difficult to complete. You can get help with it if you need. There's lots of us like our firm who've spent time really digging into this, but it's relatively straightforward, and now they're advertising a 10-day approval. I haven't had any clients come out of the other end of that, so I get this like, really 10 days, like with all the backlog, and I can't answer that question. I'm not on the other end. But what I can say is, I'm watching that, and we have a client who's just over a week in now to their first application. It wasn't under the streamline rules, but I'm hoping they'll still streamline it, and we'll see what the time frame is. I guess another couple tips if you're thinking about WorkShare. One is make sure that you're putting in your application, whether actually this is for WorkShare or any government program, type it. Fill it in on the PDF. Do not handwrite it. I always say, imagine you're in the seat of these government workers who are stacked, and I always imagine them sitting there with these stacks of applications. I mean, hopefully it's electronic, it's not really paper, and they're trying to read through them and approve them if they can. And so what I say is spend a bit more time on the front end, make it neat, make it legible, err on the side of including more information than less, because if they have to call you to ask a question, that's going to delay. So I think that's just one program, and that's one sort of niche answer to this question, but the best program, just to come back to the big picture, is going to be whatever fits best with your strategy and the place that you are right now. And the good news is there's lots of them, so make sure that you're really taking the time to consider all of your options.
Thank you. Is there any central resource you can recommend that people could go to find out about these programs?
Well, unfortunately, the programs vary in who's offering them. So there are some provinces, for instance, who have rolled out some programming. The majority, like work sharing and the supplemental uninsurance benefit, those are federal, and so it would be through Service Canada. And so, one thing you can try in terms of global resources, I know there's a lot of chambers of commerce that many charities are a member of. So for instance, I'm in Surrey and I'm a member of the Surrey Board of Trade. I know they've got a sort of resource. I would say check your local chamber of commerce, but this is the lawyer in me. I'm always like, go to the source, right? So check, maybe look to a law firm or a chamber of commerce or an industry association. Maybe CanadaHelps has something, I'm not sure, that would say, okay, here's some ideas of things that are available. My slide had some general high level, and then drill down from there, and always going to the source, or hire someone who does this and is keeping track of all of the details, because I can't imagine, I'm a business leader as well, so I'm keeping track of all these changes while leading my team, figuring out how to, like Matt said, best do online meetings now, managing all these changes. So either drill down to the government offerings or get some help from someone who's looking at this stuff, because there's people like us who are looking at it literally every minute of every day. And so we're able to kind of summarize it and quickly get you pointed in the right direction.
Great. Okay. So this question's for you, David. So some charities are, as you mentioned, they're actually doing okay, and they are going to be continuing to hire, or they may have been in the middle of a search while all this happened. How do you recommend going about hiring without appearing insensitive while many people in the charitable sector and in other industries are losing their jobs?
Yeah, thanks, Jane. And I appreciate the question and frankly the sensitivity. I'm not sure if this was one question or if this was an amalgam of a bunch of questions, but grateful that our charitable people are being sensitive to what's going on. When I would say, again, I'll just echo the comments I made earlier, that yes, if your organization is in a situation where it's stable, it's continuing to pursue its talent strategy as it relates to the overall strategy of the organization, and it has an opportunity to hire for all the right reasons, that it fits into those categories of strategy. While it's important to be sensitive at the moment, I don't think it should have to limit your business planning and your hiring strategy going in. Maybe you can be creative in the sense of being able to help serve the broader sector. Is it one position? Is it a position that could be done on contract for a period of time? Do you really need to hire them full time? I guess, from an appearances perspective, will your donors appreciate the fact that you're hiring at this time? Will other staff? Have you done layoffs? I mean, that's probably the biggest issue, is if you've done layoffs and then you're hiring for another role, that starts to, stink. I'll just be straight up. But again, if it meets the needs of the business, of the charity, and the strategic talent direction that you need to go, I would, for all intents and purposes, continue with the hiring process. And especially if you're in the middle of a hiring process and don't have financial constraints, then certainly continue with it. For those that are losing their jobs, I guess you can expect that there's going to be a lot more applications for your roles too. The reality is an opportunity that may have got 50 resumes before is probably got 150 now. So there's going to be elements to which how you weed out new applications is part of it as well. But for all intents and purposes, continue hiring. I think it's good for the sector. It's certainly good for the morale of the people that see opportunities out there. And it's a recognition that we will all bounce back from this.
Great, great. So Amanda, there are a number of leaders who wrote in with concerns about their staff members. What mental health concerns do we need to be aware of and address at this time?
Yeah, I'm just going to, I guess, address the way that the question is actually worded, which is what do we need to, what mental health concerns do we need to address? And I mean, honestly, I think that what you can address in a leadership role or as an agency is about the practices, the protocols, the culture itself. But in terms of addressing individual mental health issues, that's something that the individual themselves often need to take care of. And most of the time it's more appropriate that they're addressing those mental health issues outside of the workplace. So in other words, there's the individual issue that individuals can work on, and that the agency or leadership, their role is to break down the barriers and make the access to those supports accessible, right, and as easy to access. So I think that the concerns that I'm seeing right now is definitely an increase in anxiety. I think even if anybody didn't experience anxiety before this, they might be now. Those who had previous anxiety issues also may have increased anxiety, which maybe it was their anxiety was manageable before and now it's a little less manageable. So that is certainly something that I think is on the rise. Depression, when we start thinking about the long-term future, when we have a lot of unknown factors that can influence our mental health, so we might be seeing signs of that. On the types of psychological health issues that I'm often talking about are around burnout, which I think we are absolutely going to see an increase in, and it's important to watch for that. I think that we can see an increase in what we call compassion fatigue. So when we are in these, when we're experiencing, when we are exposed to suffering, when we are exposed to stress over a long period of time, when we are exposed to people's trauma stories, their stories of stress, that it kind of activates or opens up our heart, and we generally respond with compassion, which is defined as wanting to relieve the suffering of others. When we find ourselves as helpers in roles where we cannot relieve the suffering of others, we are feeling more helpless, we have less access to resources, we can do less, it can slowly erode at our level of compassion. And that's what we call compassion fatigue. So I think that's important to keep a lookout right now in our community in general, but definitely with our helping professionals. And another thing that is important to look out for is something we call secondary traumatic stress or vicarious trauma. So again, we are hearing a lot of the people on the front lines are hearing these really tragic stories at times. They're seeing people in very stressful or emotional states, and that can have a vicarious impact on us, right? It kind of leaves this residue. So the more we're exposed to trauma information, the higher our risk of experiencing traumatic stress ourselves. People don't always recognize that in themselves, but I mean, honestly, it's something I've been experiencing is just noticing how much I'm watching the news and how much of the news is negative, right? And so even when I'm trying to do my, self-care, decompress, chill out kind of thing, when I'm swiping through my phone on Facebook, what am I seeing? Trauma, 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 right? These really graphic stories at times. Sometimes I find myself hesitating. I'm like, I'm curious. I want to know more. But I'm also feeling overwhelmed. And I'm just going to use myself as an example. When you're exposed to that, I do counseling during the day. I walk out my bedroom door, which is my current office, and there's my kids. And so the time that I have to decompress between a counseling session or watching the news or anything like that, and then being exposed to the kids, there have been moments where I've been snappy. where they've said, they're like, you're finally here, pay attention to us. And I'm like, no, I need space, I need isolation, I need, to decompress. So I think that if we're not self-aware and giving ourselves space to sort of recover from all this trauma exposure, if we're just moving from one, needy person to the next, or whatever, that we can start to feel that pile up of stress. So these are the things that definitely agencies in general should be aware of. There was a question that came in specifically about working parents and the workload that they are experiencing, not to get into this comparison between those who are working with children and not, but there is a reality that we need to address there, and that they have some extra demands on them that I think is important that agencies address and speak about, acknowledge that they might be in different situations and might need to handle different workloads. Otherwise, those working parents are going to, talk about the curve, right? Their risk of burnout is going to increase so much faster. So those are definitely some of the areas that I think that are important to be on the lookout for.
Okay, great, thank you. And I totally relate to the walking out the door and the kids being right there, because that's my experience too. And yeah, it is, again, it's all new. We're figuring it out. So Sarah, if a charity is in a position of having to downsize the staff, what are the best practices for determining whether to temporarily lay off an employee or to lay them off full time, or do a full layoff?
Well, you can tell the frequently asked nature of this question, because I think this is the same as the first question, just asked in a different way. And so one thing I encourage, like when this first started, I started writing a lot of blogs about layoffs, and was really in this like layoff, figure out what this layoff thing is, because I hadn't seen a lot of organizations doing it in past. And now I've stepped back from that to labor cost reduction. And I think that's the way I would look at it. So the best practice for determining whether to lay off an employee, I would say, is looking at all of your options for reducing labor costs and making sure that you're considering the risks and pros and cons. I think I would be remiss to not mention the sort of one key risk area around layoffs, which is the risk that an employee is going to take the position they've been constructively dismissed and demand severance pay. And so I see some nodding, so people are hearing about this, and I'm certainly writing and talking a lot about it. So in BC, and certainly as far as I'm aware in much of Canada, if you temporarily lay off an employee, unless you have the right to lay off in your written employment agreement, which most don't, or if you are in an industry where seasonal layoffs are the norm, which may apply to some in the charitable section, but I doubt very much, you can only temporarily lay off an employee if they agree. What does it mean if they don't agree? Well, if they don't agree, that means they can say, you know what, no, I would like my severance pay. And certainly if you get enough people doing that, it is a pretty high risk. Right now, I am seeing many employees agreeing to temporary layoffs. I think there's this sense that we're all in this together. And also just like, let's wait and see, maybe this will get better soon. It'll just be a month and I can get back to work. Well, this is going to come up again in 13 weeks in British Columbia, and there's parallel lengths of times in other provinces when under the Employment Standards Act, the temporary layoff ends. So by law in BC, you can only have a 13-week temporary layoff, and then again, this severance pay issue is going to come up. So that's definitely something to think about. I guess the other point that I'd like to make about layoffs or any labor reduction strategy where you're choosing. So you're choosing which employees either to ask, to make offers to, if you want to approach it in a collaborative way, or maybe you're just choosing and advising. To be very careful about human rights. So I have heard a lot of, oh, well, I've got a bunch of people who are about to go on mat leave, so I'll just lay them off because they're going to get mat leave benefits anyways. Or I'll ask them first before I ask anyone else, hey, would you like to be laid off because you're going to be getting maternity leave? I see this happening with disability, with people who are off on leaves or around age. right? David's talking about having our, older generation leaders and our newer generation leaders. Well, if you're deciding who to lay off based on who you see as your future leaders, and that's completely age-based when you get down to it, that is illegal. And I would say fundamentally inconsistent with organizations whose purpose is to help vulnerable people. So just check back on that, because I think sometimes it seems to make a lot of common sense, and it might even seem to be the kind or right thing to do. But if you're looking at your layoffs and you're finding you're targeting particular groups, then you really need to step back and question that, because that can get you in hot water really fast. And our human rights tribunals are still operating. People can still file human rights complaints. And boy, you don't want to be dealing with that in the midst of all the other challenges that you've got right now. So focus on, when you're determining who to lay off, focus on, what their job functions are, what skills you need, what skills they have. You can pick. It's not that you can't decide who to lay off, and unless you have a union, seniority is not going to be an issue that you have to follow, but definitely be mindful of how you're choosing, and human rights issues kind of insidiously getting into those decisions.
Great, thank you.
I'd be interested to hear from Matt. I don't know if I'm allowed to ask questions, but
Sure,
I hope this is going to come up, because what I'd like to know, Matt, is what are the best practices, not for determining whether, but for how. I can certainly write a letter, but I have never coached a client through terminating someone virtually. Before, we used to make a lot of jokes about the text termination, and unfortunately I've seen that happen for some of my employee clients, and that was always like the worst, in poor taste, like terrible management. Like you always want to sit down with someone and be able to make sure they're okay. Are they safe? Can they get home okay? So how are we going to do that now that we can't sit down with someone and have them exit in that way? And I'm sorry if I'm cutting ahead. If that question is coming up,
it's coming up. It's coming up. So we'll keep going, and then we'll get to Matt quickly. Okay, so we're going to pivot a little bit here, and we're going to talk about some of the challenges that leaders are experiencing with our new work from home situation, trying to be effective leaders. So Marianne, could you talk about strategies for leading a high-performance remote work team?
Sure, and I can't wait to hear the answer to that question, Matt, because it's been burning in my brain as well. So I really appreciate that ask, Sarah. So I think first of all, I want us to be really cautious at this moment in time, using those words, high performance work culture, because although we continue to have expectations of our staff and our employees, I think that we also have to be, there was a great article that I posted yesterday on LinkedIn. We also have to be really cautious about the fact that people have an incredible additional burden in their lives right now. So I would just say, give some thought to performance measures that are a little lighter, perhaps a little kinder, and so on. But the one thing, it's the same thing again that I would recommend if we were going through this or not, and that is using things like a morning meeting every single day. These come from Japanese cultures. They come under various names. There's tons of information online, but essentially a stand-up meeting, you can be on your computer, you can be on your phone, but you're spending 15 minutes with your full team, and if that happens to be 200 people, maybe you're breaking it up a little bit and doing senior leaders and managers and so on into various verticals that way. But you're checking in with everybody. You're making sure that the priorities today are the same priorities, because that's shifting so quickly at the moment. So checking in on humans, checking in on priorities, ensuring we're all still on the same page, having conversations. I loved Sarah's comment about checking in with your values. This is a really great opportunity to do that, and you can do it in 15 minutes. Making sure that the way you're responding in this time is consistent with what you say is true of your organizational culture. So it's a really important moment to do that. And if you can, celebrate a little bit, talk about some of the good things that have happened, not just the challenges that we're all facing. And in Japanese culture, there's a lot of time spent truly celebrating. Sometimes in these meetings, you'll pick one member of the team and everyone will go around and say, what's the one thing about this person that I love about working with them? And then that person leads the next day about someone else. And you all talk about what it is that you love about working with that person. As teams are shrinking, I think it's important to talk about that and to check in with people who are, as Amanda spoke about, suffering survivor's guilt. Why am I still here and a good friend of mine is gone? Checking in on those things. You have to address the emotion in the room if you're going to allow a space for performance to actually move forward. And emotion is not something that most of us love to deal with. So those are the kinds of things I would do. And I think that there's tons of capacity, things like Zoom, lots of us who are in, and I failed to mention, I didn't introduce myself, but I work in organizational health and leadership. I've worked in the sector for 34 years. So many of us have been on those platforms for a long time. And you can have huge meetings that are highly productive. You can break into workout rooms. You can come back to the group. You can use things like Mentimeter and ask a question of the 200 or 100 or whatever the number is, people on the call. You can do gratitude check-ins, right? Say just throw out one thing you feel grateful for today. So these are all ways to develop a culture of caring and collaboration, which is what ultimately leads to high performance. So that would be the take from my perspective.
Great, thank you. Thank you. So going back to Amanda here, how can we as leaders effectively support our team members who are struggling emotionally when we aren't in the room with them, when we're working remotely?
I think that a number of recommendations have already been made by Matt, by Marianne. I really just remembering that a lot of the things that people refer to that make a healthy, wonderful, enjoyable work environment is a lot of the casual, interpersonal kind of conversations. So I think really just jumping into the what needs to get done and all the task-related kind of conversation is not helpful. I think giving space for the rapport, the checking in, being creative about that's really, really important. It's the water cooler conversations that are not happening now by the water cooler. They're happening on Zoom or on the conversation, or on the phone. So just, I think we take that for granted in general, and now we're realizing how important it is. That's the feedback I'm getting from my clients who are saying, I miss that. I miss my team. I miss the laughs. I also think that right now there is a bit of a discomfort sometimes doing things that appear to be kind of normal, like having chit chat and talking about the weather and talking about our cats or whatever it is. There's still this looming sense of urgency and crisis in the background. But honestly, I think we need to just pause the COVID-19 talk for a little bit sometimes and talk about other things. I think that the feedback I'm getting from other people is that, staying busy, staying focused on the things I love to do, helping my clients, having these plans and these projects on the go, that this is actually helping people's mental health. For others, it's important to check in with that, because maybe going forward as planned and let's persevere and, keep the train in motion is not what some people need. They're going, whoa, can you please hit the pause button on this project? I've got my kids running around. I'm full of anxiety. I can't even wrap my brain around that. So people need different things. So again, it really boils down to talk to your staff, check in with them, find out what are their circumstances. Do they have an elderly parent at home who they are terrified and, of them getting ill and they're full of that anxiety? Do they have children? Are their children young? Are their children old? There's different factors for everybody. So check in with people, keep the casual interpersonal conversations still happening, not just the task-related stuff, and again, find creative ways, as Marianne talked about, that collective self-care, enjoying each other's presence. It has great value, and I think that that's a good way of helping people, you know, who might be struggling with emotional health, and keeping things, yeah, in a good place.
Thank you. Okay, Matt, you're up. So in these times of remote working, how do we best handle staff changes? So not just firing, but also interviewing and hiring, given that we have to do all this remotely now.
Oh man, it's my favorite question. I'm so glad it was asked. How do we best handle staff changes? So I think the interesting thing from, you know, David and I both work in the recruiting space, and in our perspective, we actually see a number of people transition really easily and really joyfully into video interviews. And so know that interviewing can happen remotely really easily, and it doesn't require as much time on either end of the conversation. You don't have to go to a coffee shop and sit down at the coffee shop, order a coffee, and like you can just get into it after a couple little questions about how that person is doing. So know that some of these processes that felt like they took a long period of time or a lot of time can actually be shortened, because digital allows for a little bit more streamlined conversation. How do we handle things like firing remotely? Great question, and Sarah, I'm glad you prefaced it. So I have worked with both private companies and charity organizations that are going through this experience. What I would say, number one, is to involve your CEO or your senior leader, the executive director, in the process. If possible, actually have them be the face or the one who's delivering the message, because right now, a lot of the changes aren't performance-based. And so it's actually a shift in the strategy and a shift in how, I love how Sarah put it, labor cost reduction. Like, this is a labor cost reduction strategy and not necessarily based on you're a poor performer. And so one case was that the co-founders of the charity actually called their 20 staff members and personally went through, here are all the options, here's what we've looked for, here's a resource guide for you around claiming EI and what benefits are currently available for you. And so they really provided this high-touch conversation individually. On the other end, some of you may be saying, well, I have 50, 60 people that we need to terminate at this time, or temporary layoff, and how do we do that? And so they actually hosted a town hall on Zoom. Everyone except for, they had an HR person and their CEO present. Everyone else, no cameras and no microphones. And so it was just the CEO and the HR person who were live talking, and they disabled the chat for that purpose of conversation, but know that everyone always has a phone, so some people were probably going to be talking in the background anyway, but they were able to deliver the news in a really consistent manner with this tone of personability, this tone of, this is what it feels like for us to deliver this news, not this like, I wouldn't say to do any of it over text, because text right now can be shared, so it can easily be forwarded on to another organization or other employees. And so lead the conversation with audio as much as possible, but obviously there's some paperwork that needs to be signed and all of that, and there's online tools like DocuSign or requesting signatures through different sharing platforms. So I would use something that's a little bit more secure than just attaching a PDF to an email. So look for those options as well.
Great, thank you. So moving on, volunteers have also been impacted by all these changes that we're going through. Marianne, what are your ideas and thoughts on how to support volunteers through this time?
You know, not only support, I guess much depends on whether we're talking about frontline worker volunteers or these folks that are working, in healthcare or providing food and that sort of thing. But regardless of where they are working, I think this sounds very similar to what Amanda said. I think at the end of the day, we need to check in with people and find out what they need and not try to guess what it is that volunteers are feeling and needing. I keep saying I hate having to use that word, but had a recent client who he set up he has 200 employees, set up an Instagram page that was just for employees. So every day he speaks to what's happening, he updates and so on, but also then included volunteers into that, for a period of time. And then they'll probably, have a shift in how they manage that later. But for now, it made the most sense. There's nothing that is being said to the staff team. In this instance, it may not be true everywhere, but in this instance, they were able to really include them as really looking at them as unpaid staff, right? They're doing that kind of role for the organization. So, and there's such incredible wisdom on our boards. So I don't want to forget them because having regular check-ins. I'm working with an organization as a volunteer. They're moving forward with their strategic planning work that they had already set up. It's the conversation clearly that day has shifted a fair bit, but the board and some senior advisors are all still coming together and having that conversation. And I think that's so important to where you can continue those kinds of things to do them. And obviously continuing to be super grateful to those volunteers for their time. The other thing I'm seeing is people, particularly I'm mostly on LinkedIn in terms of social media, but people reaching out and asking me, what can I do? Where can I volunteer? Frankly, in some cases, I've said, post that, or reach out to the organization that most resonates for you. And I hope that it's an action, a real leadership action that continues for people when things settle down somewhat. Because I think there has been a real, it's been difficult over the last 5 or 6 years to get board members, to get volunteers in lots of organizations, especially at senior levels. So I feel as though this has opened up opportunity in a big way. So talk to them. There's tons of wisdom in that group of volunteers. There's tons of wisdom in your board. Gather that and use it.
Great, thanks. David, we had a question that was specific to hiring fundraisers at this time. Should we do anything different given the situation?
The fundraising talent in Canada has been in limited supply anyway, so it's always a challenge to hire for fundraising positions. But I guess I'll go back to what I said earlier. If this in the larger business plan and the strategic talent plan works for your organization and you're able to hire at this time, I would encourage organizations to keep doing it. You may be limited in the number of positions that you can hire for at this time, and that's completely understandable. I think the flip side, though, is that, and I mentioned it earlier, you're going to get a lot more applications. One of the things that I've been concerned about in our sector is what is the experience or the talent journey like for candidates. Now, I think we need to exercise an even higher level of awareness and sensitivity to what that journey looks like for candidates. We're going to be rejecting more than we've ever had to, probably. And how we go about rejecting a candidate is almost similar to how we go about telling a candidate or an employee that we're not going to need them at the moment. So high degrees of awareness that these are potentially future employees for you as well. You may be hiring one position now, but when we get through this, you're going to need 3 or 4 more. Treat them well, treat them with respect, help them recognize that maybe it was a labor cost issue that you can't hire more, but recognize that they had the talent and that you'd love to talk to them in the future. So both recognizing that if you can hire now, do it, but also recognize that you might want to hire some of these people later, and don't lose sight of them through the process. Stay in touch.
Great advice. And finally, Matt, one of the hardest things for us as leaders is to find balance in these times of stress. How do we effectively manage our team's time and priorities while also being sensitive to our own needs?
I get really excited by this time because I think that, as Marianne said, we have so much leadership literature and there's a lot of research out there about what makes a great leader great. And now is the time that we actually get to apply and practice all of that. Because the things, when Marianne was like, I don't know about high performance and there's this, you have to do. And now we're finally seeing that you don't actually have to stay at the office for 12 hours a day to be effective. You don't need to manage your team by seeing them at their desk and like checking in and micromanaging. All of this was true 5 weeks ago. And now even more so, we're now in the practice of that. And so things that I notice are setting clear priorities and goals for your team, being able to have clear deadlines and who owns those tasks or activities, a clear owner, and then a check-in mechanism, whether that be through meetings, whether it's a Slack channel, however you want to check in with your team, that's appropriate for you. But productivity and high performance is no longer stress-based. It's not about hours worked based. And so that gives us the ability to still be quote unquote high performing, but in the way that we have been preaching for so long. Now, in terms of how do I be able to keep that performance for myself and my team, I think there's an interesting aspect of it because we are adjusting to a new environment. And what we've heard from Amanda and is the importance of being able to check in with our mental health. And I think that by balancing what we need, it may not be opening the door to your bedroom right after the call. And that 10 seconds or 15 seconds, or maybe it's 10 minutes or 15 minutes, may actually be what you need in order to give yourself the time and space. So checking in what you need from a physical standpoint and a mental standpoint so that you can show up in your best in both worlds. And what that may also mean is some of you may not be commuting anymore. And so for many of us, including myself, my commute is a walk across an apartment. And what that could look like instead is I could do the same commute, but when I sit down to my desk, I actually journal and I'll like meditate with my morning coffee, and that becomes my commute. And so creating a different pattern when things are changing, that's the time to change. So if you've always wanted to read a book on your bookshelf, like use that on your morning commute. And allow your team to know, like, you don't need to be in the office till 9 o'clock. So whatever that morning routine looks like, make it so that people don't walk to their kitchen table, open up their laptop, and start typing away at 7 o'clock in the morning. I would also, here's the like really interesting thing, is that I would be really transparent at this point in terms of like, what are the key projects and priorities that your team needs to be working on? And that may mean people on your organization, in your organization, aren't doing something. And that's okay. At this point in time, as we're going through this uncertain, wobbly time, it's like, I would offer that if someone's not full tilt working 100%, allow that to be okay for this period as we calibrate into a new normal. Right now, a lot of us may be prioritizing specific tasks and activities that don't involve some of our team. Be really transparent about that up front and invite people to look at their project list where it was like, our someday maybe, if I have time to, wouldn't it be nice if we blank, and start bringing forward some of those in order to get some of those off of your to-do list with people that may not be working as much as they would like to be during this time as well.
Great, that's wonderful. And that actually answers one of the questions we had that came in about sort of expectations that people should have for productivity while we go through this time of uncertainty. So I think you already answered that. So moving on to some of the questions we're receiving, David, I have one for you, and then anyone can jump in after this if you have any thoughts on it. We have a young staff in our organization, many millennials, and they have gone quite silent, as in we are having trouble drawing information out of them, engaging them, and how they're doing and what supports they need. Is there any advice?
Can I clarify that before David answers? David, you can unmute, but I want to, right now we're talking about millennials as if they're like the Gen Z, like millennials are in their 30s. So we also want to like think of that. So if maybe you can speak to both the millennial generation and the incoming Gen Z, who would probably be like fresh out of school or our new hires as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and I'd even go so far as to say there's a bunch of boomers and Xers who have gone silent, and I forget who said it, and maybe you guys could look it up. But you know, when your best people go quiet, then you need to be concerned. You know, so I'll address the millennial question first of all. I mean, this is for all of us, but particularly for younger people. This is a significant event in the affairs of men, you know, globally. We men and women. Sorry, I didn't mean that in a gender sense, but in the affairs of the globe and what we're going through, you know, just as a human body, it's really challenging. And for folks that haven't been long in their career, this is probably one of the most significant upsets that they've faced. And I'm sure Amanda could speak to this much better than I could. But the reality is, from a career perspective, it was already challenging for them. You know, coming out of school, not necessarily landing the roles that they wanted, not necessarily getting to the positions that they wanted to be in by this point in their career. And now to have something that's going to be almost a full stop or a hard reset for many, I frankly couldn't blame them in some respects for being silent. How to manage that, I might throw that back to Matt in a second, but how to manage that is the priority. These are our future leaders. These are the emerging leaders that our organizations need, that we need to keep in the charitable sector. We can't afford to lose them, really, frankly, from a sustainability perspective, from a numbers game. I said earlier, we don't have enough Gen Xers to replace the boomers. We can't afford to lose the millennials from the charitable sector in the way that we never got the Gen Xers in the first place. So, you know, if we have a 10-year talent issue at the moment, we're going to have a 20 or 25-year talent issue if we lose the millennial group. And then Gen Z, they've just, in some respects, just graduated from university, are looking for their first opportunities. Now they've come to a sudden stop. They can't even get a job at Starbucks. Nobody can. So it's challenging from that perspective. I am going to toss this to Matt in a second, but from the personal perspective, I would just say, do all you can to encourage them, engage them regularly, as Marianne said, get on the calls every day. Maybe there's an opportunity for cross-training in a situation like this. Maybe they desire to be a major gift fundraiser, but they're doing annual plan at the moment. Maybe they can be spending some time with the major gift person in your organization, remotely, obviously. But yeah, I'll start with that and throw it out to the rest of you guys.
So, you know, I would add one thing, and that is that this may actually sound harsh given how kind we've been up until now, and that is that, you know, we haven't suddenly thrown all expectations out to the window. So if these folks are your employees, and you have clearly got a variety of ways to reach them, I think it is fair to have some insistence around them responding back. I mean, we're you know, this is not anarchy, you know, so I think that's a very fair point. You should expect a response. And I think you can also say, you know, whatever team approach you're taking, if it's a daily meeting or a weekly meeting, that there is an expectation and you'll do your very best to accommodate. You know, people have young children, perhaps, they're worried about paying their mortgage, whatever. They've got parents who, all of those things, you know, you'll do your best to accommodate all of that, but it doesn't mean that suddenly there are no expectations. And communication is a bare minimum expectation in my mind.
One of the things that I'm noticing is that, to echo your point, Marianne, communication is a necessity. So being really firm around that's the expectation. If we can't be all together in person, then we at least can communicate. One of the things I'm noticing is that there tends to be due to the level of comfort with different technology, and I don't think it's an age thing. I just think it's how exposed are you? Marianne's been doing this for 35 years and could probably school me on how to use Zoom. And one of the things that I recognize is that the level of comfort that there's background conversations that I'm not a part of. So as a leader, I used to be able to sit around a table and look at my people, and I could, walk through the office and hear kind of the vibe and pick up what people are saying. It's now happening in chat rooms, in private messaging when we're on a Zoom call. It's happening on people's phones. It's happening in emails that I don't see. And so there's this nervous energy from some of our leaders that I've been exposed to, that they're like, no one's talking to me. And the reality is that they're talking to each other to get the work done. And some practice as a leader, I need to be able to be okay with setting a clear expectation of how to communicate with me and what to communicate with me about. And that may not be all the details anyway.
Okay. Does anyone else want to chime in on that one?
Chime in with one point here, and I think this got mentioned in passing, but whenever I'm thinking about, I'm always looking at the legal lens, like we're talking about age groups, we're talking about different people, interacting in different ways due to their age. And I think right now this has been hit a couple times, but family status is so massive in terms of just like the amount of change from a day-to-day basis that's going on in people's homes. And so I think if you're seeing a certain age group that is, sort of the younger in their 20s or 30s, well, if you've got a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old that can't go to daycare anymore, that's going to be a fundamental change to your existence. And so if you're seeing certain groups of people that are going silent, it's probably good to investigate that and check in before you. I appreciate, Marianne, set expectations for sure and be clear, but also be prepared to be flexible and figure out what's going to work best for the particular people given their circumstances, and check in.
Great. Thank you. Okay, well, I want to be aware of time. We're just about come to the end of our time, so I'm going to pass it back to Jen to wrap things up.
Thank you, Jane, and thank you, everyone, for all the great questions that you sent in. That's all the time we have for today's webinar. Again, thanks to Jane for moderating, and thank you so much to our expert panelists for taking the time today to go through leadership tips and organizational best practices. And for everyone watching today, to stay updated on more free webinars just like this one, as well as other resources that we at CanadaHelps are putting together, be sure to follow us on Twitter at CharityLifeCA, our company page on LinkedIn, as well as our email newsletters if you want to subscribe to those. We also have a brand new Facebook group called Canadian Charities Connect. All that information will be in these slides that we're going to send out within 24 hours. So as always, thank you to all our attendees for joining. We hope you can join us for the next webinar that we're going to be planning soon. Until then, stay safe and take care. Thanks to everyone for joining us today.